Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Benvenidos a Fáilte Roth. Welcome, welcome to our regular first one of 2024 Safety Wing webinar, expert webinar. So thrilled to be back in the moderator hot seat today. And we have a fantastic panel with us, global panel. And I'm joining you from Zaragoza in Spain. If it's your first time tuning in live or you're watching the playback, welcome to our Safety Wing webinar today. So on the screen in front of me, while we're waiting for people to pop in, we've got over 1,000 registrations today, which is wonderful. We have a QR code so you can check out with our sponsor some more details about Safety Wing. If you want to scan that code and chat to an expert, you can do that now. And we'll give all our wonderful audience a chance to get themselves organized, join GoToMeeting and join the webinar. So maybe you'd like to make yourself comfortable, I invite you to get some water, pen and paper. And I'm looking forward to this one. This is one of my passion topics in terms of how we see remote work. It's an area I'm super interested in. And I'm really impressed to have the two panelists we have with us today and that they have given us the time. So really looking forward to it. So get comfortable while you're waiting. If you want to pop in where you're joining us from, we normally have people from all over the world. So you can say hi in the chat box in GoToMeeting. Let us know where you're joining us from. Again, to repeat, I'm Rowena Hennigan, originally from the west coast of Ireland, Galway. If anyone knows it, we've got another beautiful Irish accent, but I am biased on the panel with us today. And I'm joining you today from not a very well-known place, but it's been getting lots of coverage, a wonderful city in the north of Spain called Zaragoza. Can I see we have already almost 50 people who have joined us and more joining in. So pop in the chat where you're joining in from today. Get comfy, and in terms of the title, maybe you've already got some questions, it's got you thinking, got you inspired. So make sure that you have those questions, observations, comments ready, and you can share them in Q&A as we move through. Don't forget to make this the best experience for everyone. Your interactivity is really, if you're joining live, really encouraged and invited, because it helps us as experts. It helps me as the moderator to curate a better webinar for everyone. So we'll give it another minute or two for people to join in. Hopefully, maybe some people are just back to work in the last couple of days. Yeah, can't believe it's the 9th of January already. The time is flying. Some people have taken long breaks, I know, over the Christmas period. Some people haven't, but if you're just back to work, getting back into the swing, a wonderful way to kick off on this Safety Wing webinar, listening to our experts today and hopefully sharing any thoughts you may have in chat. And as I said, for those just joining in, the people who have just tuned in, maybe you're coming off a meeting, maybe you're running from some other appointment, but you can scan the QR code here that we have on the screen and you can check out SafetyWing, our sponsors, benefits for remote borderless teams. Let's give it another minute or so. While you're waiting, you can pop into the chat where you're joining us from. And I think in the next few seconds, we'll get going and we'll start moving through the slides. I know we've just been in the green room with the panelists, so I know we're all keen to get chatting. So we might move through the slides. I've got Kurt in the back room in Texas supporting us today. So thanks as always to the wonderful Safety Wing backroom team, making my moderating job a breeze. Almost so easy because of their wonderful, excellent support in the back room for these events. So if you don't know who I am, I'm Rowena Hennigan. You can find me mainly on LinkedIn. I'm a LinkedIn top voice, global top voice in remote work, one of the OGs in remote working since 2007. I am the founder of Row Remote. I do a lot of moderating and speaking. You can DM me as well on LinkedIn if you'd like to find out more about my services. And I'm the regular moderator here along with Lona from SafetyWing on these webinars. And moving along to the next slide. let's give a moment to thank and acknowledge and share some information on SafetyWing if you don't know them already. Aren't these graphics super funky and cool? I really love the design work from the SafetyWing design team. So it's global benefits and supports for remote and borderless teams. And if you don't know about SafetyWing, you're going to have different opportunities to check them out during the webinar. Check out a little bit more about what they're planning. And they are building and have been for a few years a global social safety net. And you can see some of the building blocks. Some of you with product backgrounds will recognize this as a product roadmap for the different things that they're planning to roll out in the future to support our borderless world and borderless living. So again, you can scan that QR code if you want to find out more, but I really appreciate SafetyWing sponsoring this set of webinars and the chance to discuss all these diverse and fascinating topics with experts from all over the world. Let you know a little bit of the flow for the session. We're going to run a poll. We always run this poll, and we do this for a couple of reasons. It sets the scene so that we understand a bit of the profile for the people who have joined in on the webinar today. And then we're going to move over, meet our experts, and move into the panel discussion. And then we're going to go on to the Q&A. In terms of the Q&A, to remind you again, we really welcome any comments, any questions that you may have. In fact, being a regular moderator, I really love the opportunity to weave those questions throughout the discussions and post and pose those questions to our experts. So make sure that you share as we go along and ask anything related to this topic today of cultivating community and building inclusive, unified remote work teams globally. So let's go over to the poll, and you'll see the poll box pop up if it's your first time on live on the webinar, and you can choose one of the answers there. So we want to get to understand a little bit of your profile. You can pick one of these that apply to you. Maybe you don't have plans to become borderless. I always comment on this, or often comment on this, that sometimes in bigger regions and bigger countries, remote is simply within borders. It's not always global. We take India, Australia, America. Sometimes people are working remotely and organizations are remotely within that border, the border of that particular large country. But sometimes the organizations are curious and they want to become borderless and support their remote teams and hire globally and access that massive talent pool. And then obviously some of the profiles as well that we have is we can see you know, that people are already within or we're operating in 2, 3 to 5 countries or 6 or more countries. So I can see the responses are being collected just now, and we've got almost over 50, creeping up nearly 60%. So we'll give that another minute or two, Kurt, for maybe one more minute till it goes up, maybe nearer to 70. So if you haven't answered, click whatever applies to you, and we'll move along. And I think it's been running for just over nearly a minute and a half. We are nearly at 70. Yeah, let's call it now in the next few seconds, Kurt, we can close that off, and let's see what the results are. Curious to see what comes through. All right, so we have almost 30%. That's interesting. We normally get a slightly different lower amount in that category that don't have plans to become borderless, but perhaps you're still very interested in this topic because of the way you operate. And then we have 20% that want to become or planning to become borderless or remote, operate remotely in the future. And then 25% as well, almost, well, that's quite a lot actually, almost 40% that are in 3 or 6 or more countries. So quite a big range there. So very, very interesting to see. And I know by looking at that, certainly at the 30% that are already operating globally, there's as many of you with curiosity that have joined in that will have good questions, and also maybe we'll have some examples to share or comments to make as we speak to our experts. So let's move along and bring our experts out onto the virtual stage today. So we have one piece, unfortunately, of sad news, and that is that Lauren Daly can't be with us today. There are terrible storms in Florida, as maybe some of you will know. I've been hearing the news coming through on the weather in the States, and unfortunately, because of power outages last minute, Lauren, telling us from a hotspot with email, was unable to join. But still, never mind. And I know Lauren is hoping to join another webinar in the future. Let's make sure that we give a warm welcome to Siobhan Sweeney joining us from Dublin and Shayna Summers joining us from Chicago. And I'm going to go to Shayna first and ask her to introduce herself. You can see a little bit more about her details on screen and then go to Siobhan. Welcome, welcome. Maybe starting with you, Jenny, you can give a little bit of an introduction, your role and a little bit about yourself. Take your time and then we'll move on to Siobhan.
All right, sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Shayna, and as mentioned, I have a very long title that you can see on here, but I am the Senior Manager of DEI and B Communities at HubSpot. So basically, when we hear my title, we see the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging part and automatically think that I am on the people team at HubSpot. I am actually on the marketing team and I sit on the community team there. And so I work externally with customers and fans of HubSpot to build communities that help to benefit diverse backgrounds of professionals. So we have a community right now that is centered around Black professionals. In the near future, we will be launching a community for Latin professionals and continuing to grow those safe spaces. And in those spaces, we provide free resources, coaching. We're going to be launching a mentorship program this year. We host regular events from panels and fireside chats like this one to regular networking events. We basically work to help decrease the gap in social capital, which is one of the #1 issues that comes to professionals who are either not white or are immigrants or just are considered a minority or underrepresented or anything that falls under that bubble. We're kind of working in the space of reclaiming that. And so we work to provide the global majority. So if you haven't heard that definition, the global majority basically identifies that the world's population is actually more diverse than it would be in like specific countries. And so we're basically working to help them level up in their careers the way that they want to. So our community has a lot of founders. It has a lot of people who are transitioning careers. They are starting new jobs, starting side hustles. It's really exciting to see the work that they're doing, and they've just come across issues that are not their fault. And so we want to be able to help basically change that path and provide the resources that they need. So I also have the lucky job to work internally with our DI&B team. This is how Siobhan and I actually know each other, because we used to be colleagues. And so it's really great to be able to see the work that she's now doing as well. But it was really fun to be very collaborative in that area and the work that we did. And not only does the work that we do benefit our customers and fans, it also benefits our colleagues as well who participate in the community, whether they volunteer, lead sessions, provide feedback, help make sure that the community is safe. So it's a really fun role. I've been at HubSpot for about 3 years and have been doing community work for I think around 7 years.
Whoa, fascinating. Loads to unpick there. And I did know, but we didn't mention it in the green room because I forgot that Siobhan and Shayna probably knew each other, because I knew that there was HubSpot in common. I wasn't sure if you'd overlapped. I will admit that, but I didn't check in with you. But that's fascinating. So I have to unpick a little bit of that, or I have to unpick a little bit of that before we go to Siobhan. And don't worry, everyone listening, this will feed into how we talk with some of our questions. But what I think is really interesting, from what I know, so observing and feeding it back to you, Shane, is the fact that you're in the community, and it's that mostly outward work that you're doing on behalf of HubSpot, because again, you picked out a very much common judgment that DEI practice as such is internal. And what you've highlighted here is that HubSpot, and it's to do with the size of the organization, I know as well, but HubSpot sees that as wider out to the wider community. So I think there's a little bit of nuance there I want to highlight, because that's really important. I also loved your explanation about the global majority, because for me, I was scribbling here frantically about how global majority, in terms of my view on geographic diversity, is a really interesting thing to put together. And so that's something that definitely I'll be going away and maybe asking you some more questions about, but exploring as well. Because certainly with my remote work expert hat on, and anyone who follows my content, I stay in my lane a little bit and talk about geographic diversity, which shouldn't be underestimated. We all know that it is a very key part, but I certainly don't move often into the other parts of the wider DEI practitioner, wider scope. So it's really nice to get that global majority explanation and tie it in there. And then also that you've worked internally back from the community piece. One other thing that you said that I think is really worth highlighting, and it's come up on previous webinars, so it may be of interest to the audience, is you also mentioned freelance contract gig work, this big move in terms of, so when we do these webinars, we often get experts, of course, who are from big organizations like Siobhan, Shayna are, but Lauren, who if she would have been with us today, I know is moving into solopreneurship as a consultant. We often get consultants and fractional people on the webinars. So I really love that you mentioned that as well, because sometimes our corporate view can be a little bit limited on that, and that HubSpot sees that because of the way they do their channel marketing, because of their overall business model. I think that's a really interesting angle as well. So very much so what Shayna is saying is that she's working in marketing and community in relation to all of this, in relation to cultivating participation and wider community values in terms of the HubSpot project product. Fantastic, Shayna. So really, really nice. Siobhan, let's move over to you and see what you can bring to this. So Siobhan is joining us from Elements Material Technology now. So tell us a little bit about that.
I surely will. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, Rowena, my name is Siobhan Sweeney. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm dialing in from Dublin in Ireland today. As Rowena said, my role is in Element Materials Technology, where I lead DE&I. Many people mightn't have heard of Element. It's a TIC business, so testing, inspection, and certification. And actually today is my 1-year anniversary here, and how time flies, thank you. Prior to working in Element, I spent 15 years in financial services, mainly in transformational roles, and then moving into lead DE&I for the bank. As part of my role there, I also went on a secondment for 1.5 years to set up a non-for-profit. So we focused on helping people in underrepresented groups get into employment. The groups that we mainly worked with were refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, people with disabilities, and then disadvantaged youth. So they were the groups. And then when I finished up doing that secondment, I was completing my master's in organizational behavior and psychology, where I specialized my thesis in why organizations are getting involved in DE&I, and what was the rationale behind that, which was really interesting, and we'll maybe go into some of that research later on. Then I moved into HubSpot, was there for 1 year. Then when an incredible recruiter got in touch with me from Bentley Lewis to ask me about the opportunity that had opened up in Element. And I honestly just couldn't turn it down. It's such a great company. We're in 270 different locations. Globally, we have over 9,000 employees and colleagues at the moment, which is fast growing as we move into 2024, because we're a mergers and acquisition business. So looking forward to tell you a little bit about our journey and the strategy that we are setting out on.
Wonderful. And I love the fact that you did the master's and you had the chance to go and study this, because we were talking a little bit in the green room as well about measurement and research in relation to all of this topic. You know, I wear my academic hat as well with TU Dublin. I'm still adjunct faculty there with the University in Dublin, and therefore a lot of this area we need to look at the empirical data, the evidence to back it up as well, like any effective area that we're trying to justify return on investment and business cases. But that's fantastic. So let's move through to the, Siobhan, I'm really delighted you're here. I'm really delighted, you know, Shayna. Let's keep it informal. I'm going to remind the audience again, as we move into some of the questions that we've laid out to go through on the topic, that if there's anything, you've heard loads of wonderful, I mean, there might be some people who are interested in careers in this area that are joined in as well. So also you can take this chance finding out more about Element, because it's such an interesting company as well, finding out more about HubSpot. So don't be afraid to ask any general questions as well in the Q&A. But let's start off with the first question that we had on our list today anyways. And both of you said that in terms of, well, like we were talking in the green room, in terms of your experience, which together I would imagine is vast. It's probably 2 decades or something. But one of the things that came up is that we want to not only at an organizational level, at a team level, embrace diversity. And we're going to a certain extent with global teams, have diversity there. We don't want to make assumptions, but we're going to lean into that. But we can actively use that as a catalyst for building a unified global team, for fostering engagement and that sense of belonging. So Siobhan, I know you said you could comment on this one, but I was wondering, from your years of experience, what's the story that comes to mind when you think of a best example of that, of a practical initiative or a case study in terms of how you've built that belonging with those diverse teams?
Yeah, I actually think my time at HubSpot was one of the ways that I saw really that inclusion and belonging piece come to the forefront. It's such a great company in terms of the values and the culture that it creates. I think even if you see people that are colleagues in HubSpot, when they post on LinkedIn, the amount of likes and community that it has, even through the marketing, I guess, on the brand. I think one of the ways that I've seen that sense of community come together really, really well is in the time of crisis, and when something happens, how colleagues all come together and how there's safe spaces created. It's a space where you hold for individuals to come together that are maybe part of a community. They mightn't be part of a community, but want to come together on a certain topic. And it's holding that space where people can come together and share how they feel, share thoughts and the impact that it's having on them, whether it's on their professional lives or their personal lives, how it might be impacting their work. I think that HubSpot is a place that's really invested in culture, and is really, really, really great at bringing communities together. And for me, I know that you talked about, when you posed the question initially, Ro, you mentioned the diversity piece and how that comes together within global teams. For me, sometimes it's almost stripping back all the terminology that we have, because I think terminology can be so scary for people and for leaders that are not comfortable in this space. What I try and do, and even in the company that I'm in now, Element, is I always put people at the heart of everything that we do. And when I'm talking to leaders, I always try and emphasize, don't worry about some of the terminology. It's all about our people. And if we can really double down on making sure that people can bring the best version of themselves to work, whether that's in person or virtual, I think that's where you really start to bring that sense of community together. And I think also leaning into the values that you have within whether it's in the organization or people's own values. Once you know your teams and the people that you're working with, if you can find that common interest, I think even within global organizations, we're all working towards the one mission. How do you bring that to life for people, leaving the diversity to the side? And then for me, it's continuing to educate. Education is so important, moving from like awareness into knowledge, and then having clear call to actions on certain things that you're doing within your teams on an ongoing basis. Making sure that you're calling out bias or bystander behavior. How can you do that so a place feels very safe for people, again, to bring that best version of themselves to work? I think for me, there are some of the things that jump straight off in terms of how to really foster that sense of community. And in most organizations, I think that the leaders really play, the manager or the leader of the teams play such an essential role in this. They can make or break your journey in an organization. And you know what, one simple thing I think that I'm thinking of today is, it's my 1 year anniversary. I had a message first thing from my boss, like saying, happy 1 year. This is your contribution. You've done so much in the year. From all of my team members, there's simple things that you can do in a way to connect with other people, to make sure that you're really encouraging that sense of community and that sense of inclusion and belonging, even though you mightn't talk to people on a day-by-day basis. There's small little nuggets that you can do. Or when you meet with people, it's knowing your first name, knowing what you're working on, being able to ask, how are you doing in that area? That makes people feel like, yes, I am making a difference. And just bringing it back to the basics. I think a lot of this for me is, sometimes we jump so far-fetched that we forget about the fundamentals. and really setting that foundation in place that people understand. I think sometimes diversity is such a hot topic, I think, within so many organizations for talent acquisition as well, when they're thinking about diverse candidates to bring through, whether that's BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous, people of colour, whether it's women, whether it's people with disabilities. I think that you can sometimes get so sidetracked by the diversity piece that you forget about the most important piece, is making sure that every person, regardless of the background, has a welcoming experience throughout that talent life cycle. So Rowena, I'm sorry, I've just touched on so many different elements there, and I probably went on a bit of a tangent, but you'll like get very passionate about this topic as we get into it.
Oh, I love it. Oh, I love it. Seriously, don't worry about that. I've got my love heart on as well, my green love heart. Don't worry about that. Loads to unpack now. And I want to highlight a few things in relation to remote work skills, Siobhan, that you've hinted in. And I totally agree with you first about the language, the use of language, diverse teams, global teams. Shana, you can come in on this as well in a minute, but we need to keep it simpler. How do we make everyone feel included? And you gave those beautiful, simple examples about being remembered for your anniversary, the different little gestures. Remember in the office, I remember when you go to the office, if someone offered to make you a cup of coffee, if someone came over and congratulated you or mentioned something, it's the same thing, but we just need to be a bit more intentional online on how we do that and use the tools that we have. But what I thought was really interesting to pull out there was the piece about the safe space in crisis, right? And I think that's something that I would encourage all the audience to stop and think about, because I know it's kind of worst case and it may feel a bit disaster planning or whatever to people, but that's actually where it really, really matters. Because if we can have those difficult conversations and be there for people, even reach out, whatever it is we decide to do, if we have that plan for the darker times when people need support, then in the good times, the structure is there and it's lighter and it's easier. So I think that thinking through that, I know that a couple of remote work peers of mine talk about that. What would happen if you couldn't work next week? What would we do? And they go through that type of a coaching as leaders as well, sometimes with some of their team. So I think that's one thing I want to pull out there. The second thing is that word sort of coaching or more advanced leadership skills. You already said it as well, Siobhan, that leaders are comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations. So we can talk about layoffs, we can talk about pandemics, we can talk about personal situations that whoever in the world that is on our team that we want to feel included may be going through, and how we demonstrate practical emotional intelligence as leaders to have those conversations, to reach out using channels to create those environments. So I think that's the other point there, that all of us on here, as I said, probably have quite a lot of experience, but earlier in our careers, nobody learns how to do this without practicing it, either with a coach, with a peer, with a leader you trust. I've had to do it throughout my career. I'm learning about it all the time. So there's creating the safe spaces equally. I actually did a newsletter on it today. I think you might have seen it, where I said, let's quit the focus on AI and all these new tech tools, because in my experience, many, many leaders in the modern world are not comfortable with these conversations. They don't know what to do, and they certainly don't know how to do it in the environment we're in now, because that's totally different, and sometimes it can require a lot more skills. So don't apologize. Thank you, Siobhan. So lots to unpack there. Is there anything different you would add, or different you would add, Shane, or anything you wanted to add on to that? I think that's a great way to kick off.
Yeah, I think the emphasis on just being a human in these spaces, I think because we're so used to being in the same spaces as everyone, just as Siobhan was mentioning, you would decorate somebody's desk, you would bring them in a snack, you would do these little things. So you think about those engagements and how you can do it virtually. Sometimes you just have to remember those things that you would do in office. I know my team, as simple as before we start any of our team meetings, we have an icebreaker question. And I leave like 10 minutes for us to go on tangents about really funny things and just have conversation. We found out accidentally that our colleague had gotten a dog 2 months before, and it was the second dog. And we were like, wait a minute, we ask about your one dog all the time. How did we not hear? And he was just like, oh, we haven't really had time to like sit and talk about it. And so just leaving those moments to kind of sit and chat, even in your one-on-ones, maybe you make it, instead of it being a 30-minute one-on-one, make it a 45-minute one-on-one so that you have that first 10 to 15 minutes to just chat about life and what's going on and how your kids are doing. We know that a lot of folks are working from home now, and when kids come on, I think, I don't know where this started, but I think a lot of parents were worried about having kids on screen, and us as people love it. I'm just like, yes, bring the children, let them do all of the things that they do because they have no filter, they have no worry. And I know the parents are trying to be as professional as possible, but accepting those moments where the kids could come on and just have a conversation, or the kids' names, and you're always like, wait, they have to say hi to me before we can start this meeting. It brings that human aspect. The celebrations, even my manager, similar to Siobhan's manager, my 3-year is in a couple of weeks. And he said, I'm sending you something. You're not allowed to open it until February 8th. I was like, got it. Thank you. Appreciate it in advance. And things of that nature. I know that it seems hard now, especially because we're so isolated. But if you are, like Siobhan said, finding those little moments to do that, but also taking in the extra time to like be invested in the development of your team members. So not just having them come in, execute on work, you give them feedback and then keep it moving. Take a genuine interest in the stuff that they want to do, the things that they want to learn. Have separate professional development conversations outside of their one-on-ones. One-on-ones, professional development should be 2 separate conversations. Figure out ways that you can join other teams to have conversation. My team is very small. There's 3 of us total, but I'm on sub teams that have like 8 people, 10 people, things like that. What are ways that we can go and join their meeting? Or they can come and join our meeting. And for what? Like, are we doing an educational moment? Are we just being like guest stars? Are we talking about our projects? A lot of times you can sit in a room and be able to see like what your coworkers are doing and how they're engaging and meet together, but you have to be really, really intentional about almost everything that you're doing in these areas. So it makes you feel belonging because you're building this space. I know our team, we had kind of an up and down moment with our directors. We didn't really have a lot of consistency when it came to it. So we finally got a new director, and he asked us as managers what our number one piece of feedback was to bring the team together, because he noticed that the team was very disjointed. We have like 4 pillars on our community team, and he was like, it seems like everybody's kind of off doing very similar things, but in different areas and with different people. So how do we get everybody together? And most of us didn't know each other. We knew faces, we knew names, but we didn't know each other. We didn't know where anybody was living. We didn't really know a lot of things. So we said as managers, like the number one thing is figuring out how this team can feel like a team. And so he switched up the whole way that we did our team meetings. Like, first of all, we had regular team meetings, which was exciting. And we take the time in between to just go and have regular conversations. We have a team meeting doc that everybody can add to. So we have a section for shout outs. We have a section for ask and offers, where people can ask for help or offer assistance in certain areas if they've heard things. We leave opportunities for team members to come in and present. So it's not just managers and senior leadership. We go off into breakout rooms. So it's a shuffle every time. You never know who you're going to be in the room with, or if you're going to be in the room with the same person for 3 weeks. And then you're like, no, I have to be in a room with you now because that's what we're used to. Sometimes we sit and we answer the questions. It's a trust basis, or sometimes we just go off and have fun conversations about things that are happening in our lives. And then we're all, together on that. And putting that in place has made it so that our meetings are way more productive, but we're also way more invested. Before it would just be like, okay, this person's presenting, cool, I'm taking note of it. But now it's like we've built this personal connection with this person. Now I'm here, I'm ready to volunteer for whatever you need help with. I'm going to get involved in whatever you need help with. So it's all of those little human moments that we can bring folks together to remind them that it's like there are real people on the other side of the screen. And yes, we want to work well together, but also I want to be excited about working with you. So it brings that belonging piece together.
Fantastic. And so, again, so much value there. So I'm going to pick out some of the key threads that I heard and feed them back. So please add in anything else. I love that piece of being human. I also love that you picked out the difference from think again. I mean, when I do my training, a couple of my slides are actually think about the office, the real office, that many people can picture or visualize, especially if they're in the hybrid model, and then think about the gaps, not that one's better or worse, the gaps, the differences between the two, and how you could fill those in. And you touched on some of those with a really intentional set of leadership and structure that was put in with the example that you shared, Shana. So that was really, really useful, because frequency and regular meetings is really important in these things, because we need a rhythm, don't we, in terms of leadership. And also what you touched on, mentioning one-to-ones again. And you know, in the title of this webinar, we've got cultivating participation, global teams. You seem to be talking about groups of people. Community, it's a group of people. But a lot of the trust gets built one-to-one, doesn't it? Because the rapport can be built to one-to-one. And not that some people don't want to be involved in groups, but they need their confidence, they need to feel more comfortable. And they often get that from the one-to-ones. You mentioned breakout rooms where, you know, people are making their little smaller relationships, and then that feeds back into the bigger group. And that's also something I think that doesn't get spoken about enough. We do need the leadership skills where people can foster these one-to-one relationships, and then will trickle out. It will trickle out to be something that creates something wider for the group. So I think that that was interesting that you mentioned that as well. We get a lot of HR teams on joining these sessions as well. So I thought that piece that you mentioned about the director bringing in, as I said, the regular meetings, that rhythm. I think this is also something that, if we look at remote work documentation and structures, which I'm sure some of you have heard about, and different models, that often we've got within that the processes for leaders where they're encouraged to, you know, what is your frequency of one-to-ones? What is your frequency of team meetings? Do you do like Shana does with her 15-minute rapport building with her team, right, which is amazing when she's adding that on to a one-to-one. But also in my team meetings, I often leave a 5-minute virtual open door at the end, which means that people can just stay on if they want to have a chat with me. And that's at every team meeting. It's an informal chance. So it's almost like my door is open in the office, or I'll be at the water cooler, but you know, on a Zoom or whatever it may be. So there's lots of different ideas there. So let's take what's been spoken about there in terms of building out that more sort of, how do we lead in global teams? How do we help people feel they can be included and participate, to the word community. So I'm going to jump into community now, right? So Siobhan, I'm going to go to you on community, because you talked about safe spaces for groups, and I think we can lean into a lot of what's already been shared. But what are success factors for community? What do you think a good community? I'm going to ask this in a very esoteric way, but I think you can answer it. I'm going to trust my gut. What does a good community feel like in terms of?
Yeah, for me, I think it's a safe space, again, which is very important. A space that I can come together with other people that respect my values. A space that can be progressive if I want to drive change. A space that is respectful to all. And one of the ways that I like to, I guess, set off in terms of building that safe space is to create an intentions as you're going in. So sometimes you could call it ground rules within certain meetings that people have. Another way to do it is set intentions. If you're going into, whether it's to discuss a topic, it's going into an all hands kind of a meeting. The one that I like to start with first is like, listen and be as present as possible. I think especially when you're working from home, there's so many distractions going on around you. You can start to multitask very easily and lose focus. So asking people to be as present as possible, to own their voice, share their perspective, whatever way that is, whether it's through the chat, emojis, taking themselves off mute. But also I like to co-create that with the teams. So what intentions do people want to set as well? So if we're, as Shana was mentioning around team meetings, if we have a team meeting on a weekly basis, what sort of intentions do we want to set before we go into those spaces? And that's something that we do here in Element with we call them colleague resource networks. In other companies, they might be called ERGs. So you have those intentions that we set before our meetings. to make sure again that they're productive and everybody is getting their voice heard that wants to speak up around a topic, and share their thoughts on a certain item. So for me, that's something that I found that works really well in terms of setting the basis.
And I love that when I asked you about community, you went into those kind of practical touch points we have in our teams, like meetings, like gatherings and events, and how you would suggest, have the intentions, invite those norms for when we all get together on a meeting. But I think that that's really interesting for bigger organizations. And I know we've got all sizes of organizations joining it. So I also want to remind everyone that you can find very easily, if you are from an SME or from a smaller organization, team charters and team meeting charters. Google it, you'll find them online. And they're a similar, smaller slice to what Siobhan is saying as well, because sometimes in smaller teams, we don't have people that are responsible for that. It needs to be the leaders that might need to look at it themselves. But I love that, because I think how we treat each other virtually in meetings, how we're even running in this webinar, like I said, today, we're all contributing, we're all trying to be as inclusive as possible and demonstrate best practice, that in itself is it's the real touch point. It's a real strong touch point, isn't it, in terms of when we can foster that feeling of community. So I really like what you explained there. You said ERGs, want to make sure I've written that down. So employee resource groups could also be, could be where.
Are one of the ways that we would build community. Here at Element, we call them colleague resource networks. So that's another.
Okay.
Sometimes they're called business networks as well in other companies. Another way that we would channel into the community here is through our ambassador program. So as I mentioned, we're we have about 270 labs now globally, which is growing. So what we do is we have ambassadors that are really their role is to be culture carriers, and they would bring messages to life within their location. So it could be around DE&I, it could be a certain topic like Black History Month, International Women's Day that we're rolling out, and they would bring it to life, but do so even though we have a global strategy. Sometimes the way it lands in different places in the world is very, very different. So they would make sure that it's landing in the right way within their location, and they're just such an integral part in terms of making sure that our messages spread, that they're constant and consistent, which I think is really, really important, because I think a lot of the points that we're referring to today, whether it's around our leaders, whether it's around people, they have to be authentic for people to believe in them. You have to have your own stamp around what you're talking about. It can't be just a book that you've read and then you're going to speak word for word on it, or an article that you've read and say it back to people. It has to be authentic, and people want to feel like it's real. So a lot of the work that we would do with our ambassadors is bi-monthly training, where we would bring that group of ambassadors together, go through the awareness, we would train them on it, and then we would discuss from a global perspective, how would this land in your location, any blockages that they might have, any challenges that they might foresee, and how do we work through that. So it's bringing that practical element as well to life for me, which I find that works really, really well. And then another way that I think works well is if you do it again in a consistent way, is looking at technology to play its role. So certain organizations might have Slack, our organization uses Teams. What are those channels that you have that you can get to people through different time zones, whether it could be a crisis moment that you need to bring community together to a call and a safe space, whether it's you want to get colleague feedback on a certain topic, utilizing that technology, whether it's through our ambassador network, whether it's through our CRMs. How do you keep that alive and constant? And again, making sure that it's authentic in an ongoing way, that people don't feel like it's a tick the box and you're just ticking this D&I box to say, yeah, you're building community. No, that's people can see through that. You know, we hire smart people into our organizations. They're still smart when they get there and when they're working. So people want to feel that it's real, and most of all, that the things that we're doing in terms of community is adding value. How are we adding value, and how are we keeping that alive? For me, there are some of the things that jump out straight away.
Wonderful, and it leads back to what Shayna said earlier about that human touch as well, that you've the ambassadors with responsibility, because that's building the ownership and it's trickling down to your different locations. I have to give you a large clap, and I'm stating my bias as well, that you're training those people in terms of how they roll out those ambassador type programs, because I think so many big organizations in particular, they appoint roles to people, they have these great big plans, but they don't follow through with the training support. So that, for example, leaning into your beautiful illustration there of, say, Slack, using Slack or a Slack channel for certain activities or whatever, if you don't test and review that on an ongoing basis and get the feedback from the ambassadors that might be involved in the rollout and administration, it's almost wasted, because all it is the technology sitting there with the channel built and no one keeping an eye on it and no one feeding back on it. So I really, really like that. And I think that the training piece is really, really, it is something. I keep seeing all these posts about training up on LLMs and all this, and I have to say that I feel our interpersonal skills in the whole area of remote work it gets left out, and it doesn't get spoken about enough. So I really like that you've mentioned that. Do you want to add anything else before we move over to and ask Shona to contribute, Siobhan?
Yeah, I was just going to say the only other thing that we do is we do training on a quarterly basis to our leadership team, and then we hope that has that trickle effect down through our organization. But again, I think that so many, especially within our organization, our GMs, our general manager population, there's so much that falls on their shoulders. They're almost all running mini businesses in themselves. So it's really important that it's not just coming from one voice, as in those role models from a leadership perspective in terms of building community and having that awareness and knowledge. It's coming from multiple points that we all have. I think one of the biggest things for me, and people will be sick of hearing me say this in my organization, we all have a duty of care when it comes to our people and the culture that we want to create in our organization. It's not just the person with the title. When we walk out the door, nobody has a title. We're all people, and it's bringing it back to that person-centric approach. I think if you can instill that in people, that everybody has a duty of care to contribute towards your culture and the environment that we all work in at the end of the day. And I think that when the same information, I heard one of my comms colleagues saying, you have to say the same piece of information, Siobhan, 7 to 10 times.
Yes,
So
yes.
I'm repeating myself, I will take that and say 7 to 10 times. If we can hit people from multiple different angles, it's not just the same voice, it's different people talking about the same thing. Hopefully that sticks, and that sense of community continues to grow no matter what channel it's coming at.
Wonderful. And Shayna, before we go to you, I want to stop on the duty of care piece for 1 minute, because I think that's a really interesting point. And we could call that, because we have a global audience joining in today, we could have that humans responsibility, self-responsibility, and responsibility and respect to other people. We don't have to even call it so much duty of care. From a legal, if we've got legal people who care on, they do sometimes call it duty of care in terms of employer obligations, etc. But certainly when we talk about safe spaces, I have to get in here because I've got my mental health first aid training. I've got various training in relation to mental health support. That duty of care in terms of how we support people and creating those safe spaces, respecting and providing those safe spaces and caring and being concerned. As Siobhan says, you walk out the door of whatever building, or you leave your home office, or you walk away from your co-working space, or whatever it may be, you're still human, and we want to create, all of us take the responsibility to create safe environments for working for people, and care, and have a feel a responsibility to that care. And I think that going forward, anyone who's joining in who's interested in careers and leadership development is something as well that's going to be a hot topic as we move through the next few years, because it's finally surfacing up. And if you want to do a little bit more thinking about that, it very much leans into being able to have those conversations we mentioned earlier as well, be able to turn up empathetically for your team and listen carefully and support them. So loads to unpack there, but I love that it went along that discussion thread, Siobhan, because I think that it's all related to how can we make people feel included, invite them to participate if we aren't authentic, and I'm touching my heart and purpose, about caring for them. All right. And so that's really what we've touched on there. So Shayna, over to you. On community, to remind you, we're still on community, even though we've spoken about lots of stuff.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the things that Siobhan mentioned are spot on, and I think when it comes to the spaces that we're building and for folks to feel like they can be 100% themselves in the space, that's kind of the realm we were going on. I want to be sure I'm not going off on another
Yes,
tangent.
yeah, exactly.
Is a recognition of each person's experience and them feeling like they can show up as themselves. So I think initially we were defining like what makes a
Community, yeah.
community a community. You know, the age-old definition is just people getting together around a common interest. And then you peel back the layers on that. You peel back the layers of like what your identity is, what your experience is, where you're from, what it's been like to grow up, how do you identify, and that you have been able to come into the space as yourself, purely, authentically, 100%. You don't have to like mute anything about yourself. And I think that's the biggest thing that folks are trying to figure out, especially if they haven't had that experience. It's the basis of knowing that you're open to learning, you are accepting, and that there are opportunities to kind of understand other folks' experiences as they move forward, and to recognize that their experience is not the end all be all, and be open to learning. I think that's just like the main message there. I think like when I think about my identity, I am Black, I'm queer, I'm a woman. People already have certain judgments, certain things that they feel about it. I am obviously all the time, every time you see me, the first thing you're going to see is that I'm Black. Then you're going to assume that I identify as a woman. And then maybe they'll find out that I am also queer. And these things peel out, but as you learn those things about me, nothing about how we engage, how we talk, things like that should change. And that's the basis of what it's like in community. So how are you doing that in your workspace? How are you doing that on a day-to-day basis without making the person have to educate you, without making them feel like they have to be the national spokesperson on whatever identity or background or things like that, and supporting them in that way, and understanding that maybe I don't get it. How do I have those hard conversations? I think we mentioned earlier where it's like managers are used to having those conversations. A lot of managers are not, and they
No.
don't know how to make it like uncomfortable in the things that they do. And there's a lot of apologizing, and there's a lot of, oh God, I don't know what I did and how I did it and things like that. And it's really just being honest and open and vulnerable yourself to say, you know what, I've never actually experienced that. Do you feel safe enough to discuss this with me? Do you feel comfortable enough to share what your experience looks like? Is this a good time to talk more about this? Do you want to talk more about this with me, or would you like me to find somebody else? And not taking it personally when that happens, to show that like the number one thing that you're doing is caring for the person that you're working with, and being willing and open to help in whatever way, and understanding just the baseline of different things that happen, whether it's around a holiday, whether it's around a cultural celebration, things like that, that you're able to be able to put in place. And not only that in terms of identities and things, but also just in terms of life. Life happens. People go through divorce, people go through breakups, people have loss in their day-to-day life. And I think a lot of folks, if you could take the time to understand that maybe this project is going to be late, and maybe I don't have the words to say that it's going to be late, but I'm going to be able to tune in on the different things that are happening in your life. And that starts with the stuff that we were talking about before, your one-on-ones, your check-ins. If you hear that something happened to somebody in their life, you have the understanding of how important that person may have been in their life, or how important that pet or just that experience or something, and now it's gone, or something has happened with it, anything like that. You have the understanding to say, take your time, bend over whatever you need, go and take your time. And again, bringing back that human aspect of it. So it's a big piece of just like, not only, I think a lot of people stop at celebration and don't shift into that like understanding point. So I think that's the big thing around belonging, is like taking the steps to understand, taking those steps to celebrate, but taking those efforts to say that different parts of your identity, different parts of your background and things are not going to affect the relationship that we have, and go from there.
Beautiful. And the thing is, it's getting comfortable with those uncomfortable conversations sometimes for leaders, and we're all learning all the time. I mean, look at what the world has gone through even in the last few months, the different
Mhm.
conversations that I'm having with different teammates in parts of the world with war, etc. It's not easy. It's not easy. But the human side of us that wants to care should also hopefully want to learn. And a lot of coaching and good leadership practice uh, does go through scripts. So it goes through scenario practice in virtual conversations, and you can maybe test out some of these conversations with a coach or a mentor that can take you through an exchange. So anyone listening that's going, oh, I wouldn't be able to do that, there is training, there is supports out there to do this. You're not going to learn it overnight. Everyone's on a journey, and all of us here on this call, I'm sure, are not ready for any situation. We're all going to be thrown in at some point to these things that we're not ready for, because that's life. The one thing that's certain about life is it's unpredictable, right? It's unpredictable. And I think what I want to finish on, so I want to just ask people, we're coming up near time, but I want to ask people if there is any questions. So how do we check? I don't see anything coming through in the Q&A, but I'm just going to double check now. But one of the things that I wanted to finish off on and squeeze it in towards the end was just the piece about, because we got really into some good heavy conversations there, which was great, and I've learned loads, was the piece about measuring community impact. So Siobhan, I know you had a little bit to add on this. We don't have loads of time, so I'm just wondering if you could share something in terms of a real practical example to finish up on how, and if there's time, we can go over before we say goodbye to Shana and see if she's got anything to add. But on measuring impact, is there anything that comes to mind that you would say in terms of a piece of advice?
Yeah, I'll be really quick on this point. For measuring, for me, there's a number of different ways that you can do it. I guess if you're talking about the wider communities that you have, again, especially if there's money being invested into your colleague resource networks, for example, if you're holding events or doing certain programs for groups of people, you can always measure it by the amount of people that come to the events. You can measure it through the programs that you run, whether it's a mentoring or a sponsorship program, and run the before and the after in terms of what the program and how it helped and supported people within their careers and to develop to the next stage. For me, also through employee engagement, so through the different surveys that you use, whether it be on an annual or a biannual basis. I normally use an inclusion index, which can consist of 5 to 7 questions, and you're going out then to your global audience and you're asking questions that really are identified and link in with the inclusion and belonging journey that your organization is going on. And then at least you have a baseline to measure that on an ongoing basis. And one of the ways then that I like to complement that is to do focus groups. So making sure that you're doing focus groups that accompany different time zones, that you're being inclusive, I guess, from that perspective. But really is saying, this is what I heard, or this is what the comments said in the survey. Is there anything that you want to add to that? Does this seem right to you? And really get people's thoughts and opinions around it. I found that that's worked really, really well. And any colleagues that I've done that with, they're so grateful for taking the time to actually double down on a number of those questions and get further feedback to make sure that the organization is going in the right way. So for me, when you're investing in your colleagues, when you're investing in your own journey, it's really important to continue to measure the impact of what you're doing to know if it's being successful or not. Whether it's through the groups that you have, programs that you run, ongoing day-to-day contact with your managers, asking those questions, whether it be through surveys, focus groups, that you're really doubling down, and then you're doing something about the feedback that you receive, and you're going back then to your audience and you're communicating what are you actually doing. I think that's so important. Sometimes we do all of the surveys or the focus groups and we don't follow back up. So making sure that you have that partnership approach as well, whether it be with your comms team, your marketing team, how are you going out and using the channels that you have available to making sure that you're bringing that to life then in terms of the measure and the impact.
Fantastic, and you've hit on all the key pieces there in 3 minutes, so you deserve a prize for that one. Definitely. I love the simple, but if you don't have a benchmark, you can't continue forward with the measurement. You have to start benchmarking. So anyone joining in, start today. Start tracking even simple things, and then you can build off that before and after, etc. You move from talking about, of course, the quantitative to the qualitative, where we're looking at focus groups in other ways. And the real gem, and I think it's probably pertinent that we will finish up on this one, unless Shane has anything quickly to add last, is that do something with it. Gather the feedback, but show that you're doing something with it, because data for data's sake is no good to anyone. So we really want to try and ask people for their input and then show that we care and we've listened. So anything quickly, you've probably about 30 seconds, Shana, do you want to sneak in there that you would add to the measurements, or are we good to finish off there? Has Siobhan covered it off?
Nope, Siobhan covered it all. I have nothing else.
Nothing else. Wonderful. Well, I'm just going to check. I didn't see any questions coming. Just quickly to see if there was anything. Oh, they have now come in. So let's see. We've got 1 or 2 minutes, and if you don't mind hanging on, I'm going to call out one of them that I think is probably actually it's more a comment. That's what I'm going to do. So I saw one coming in. They were right in at the end. Would you say honesty is the best policy and being true to your work and doing your best at your job? How do you handle it when management take and when management, or I think I would like to say leadership there, take that as a way to kick the employee and make them feel insignificant, right? So I think that obviously is something that at this stage we're not going to get answers to, but what I want to do is I want to remind that person who asked us. So thank you for sharing such honestly. It sounds like obviously a very sensitive question for you at the moment, but I want to remind you about duty of care and respect and elements of being human that came out during the conversation. And I think if you were tuning in during those, that kind of answers what you've asked there, that if we had pitched it to the panel, they would have, of course, come back to that piece that we meant. We need to think about humans. We need to think about respect. Also, back to the point about training for leaders. If you can dig into your own empathy, people, and particularly people leaders at the moment, don't always have the training. So if you're having a bad experience, if you've got that within you, to give them the benefit of the doubt and show some empathy, it's maybe just because they simply don't know how to do it any differently. So maybe I'm being too hard focused there, but I'd like to end on that positive note, that hopefully that can be a bit of understanding in terms of that. So that question's come through. I don't see anything else, and I don't want to keep us too long, so apologies that we didn't fit in any other question. But what I would like to do is not finish too late. We've just got 1 minute over because everyone has got the work to get back to in the different places. I know Shana obviously is earlier in the day than here in Spain. What I would like to do is say thank you so much to Siobhan and to Shana. I really enjoyed that. I've made extensive notes. Thank you so much for your time. Fantastic webinar on cultivating participation, building community and global teams. From SafetyWing, the backroom team, and myself, thank you for your time so much. And if you'd like to check out SafetyWing, you can catch one of those QR codes there. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Take care, everybody. Cheers. Bye.